The US military isn't just strong in 2025, it's unmatched. According to Global Firepower, America ranks number 1 in the world, again. With a power index score of 0.0744, it leads ahead of Russia and China, who trail behind with 0.0788. That might sound close, but in military terms, it's a massive gap. Because when it comes to raw firepower, funding, global reach, and speed, no one even comes close. Today we're breaking down exactly how the US keeps its edge, from trillions in defense spending to unmatched manpower, aircraft, and naval dominance. Let's start where military power begins: money. Money is one of the most important factors in determining a country's military strength, as it costs a colossal amount of money to forge a strong force. Millions of dollars can go into the production of a single tank, for example, with some of the world's finest fighter jets having 9-figure price tags. Then there are the costs of the many smaller vehicles, weapons, and other pieces of equipment a strong military needs, plus funds for training and paying active duty personnel, from soldiers to mechanics, engineers, pilots, and more. It's no secret the US spends heavily on defense. Whether you look at recent years or go back further in history, it's constantly had the biggest military budget by far, sometimes spending up to 10% of the country's entire gross domestic product, or GDP, on defense. In 2025, the US is expected to spend just under $900 billion on its military, which is over 3% of its GDP. In comparison, the next biggest spender is China, with an officially reported 2025 defense budget of around $249 billion. Russia's budget is even lower at approximately $126 billion. Even if you combined and doubled both, the total would still fall short of the US defense budget. And while some analysts suggest that China may underreport its actual spending, the US maintains a decisive lead, not just in funding, but in global reach, alliances, and cutting-edge military technology. Even more astonishingly, if you added up the budgets of all the countries ranked 2nd to 10th in 2025 spending, which includes China, Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, the UK, Japan, Australia, France, and Ukraine, that still would not match the US budget. Next, let's look at manpower. People are the beating heart of the army. They're the ones who man the tanks, pilot the jets, fire the rifles, and so much more. You need trained, willing, and skilled fighters to build a truly strong fighting force, and the US certainly has plenty of those. But there are several different ways to measure manpower, and the US doesn't top the list in every single one. So let's go through them and explore the value of each. First, available military manpower. This tells us how many people each country could mobilize in the most extreme situations, like full-scale global warfare or a major invasion. According to GFP, the US could call on around 150 million people in total, which is close to half of the country's population. That's not the highest figure on the list, which is hardly surprising, as the US is not the most populous country. Instead, the two biggest countries in the world, China and India, come in first and second. China could call up around 764 million people, while India has an available military manpower pool of 662 million. The figures are quite similar in terms of the fit-for-service population. This tells us how many able-bodied people each country has that will be able to fight or play a part in a long-term military campaign if they had to. China once more tops the list with around 626 million. India comes in second with 522 million, and the US sits third with 124 million. However, these two stats aren't all that important, as it's highly unlikely that countries like the US, China, or India would need to call up almost half of their entire populations to fight. Instead, to get a better view of how strong each country's force is, it's best to take a look at the numbers of active duty personnel and reservists. Active duty personnel are basically full-time members of the military. They're the most highly trained, combat-ready individuals, dedicating their lives to the military. Reservists, meanwhile, are people who have spent some time undergoing military training or service but aren't currently involved with the army. They remain in reserve, ready to serve if and when called upon. The US has an impressive total of 1.3 million active duty personnel. That once again puts it in third behind China and India. However, the difference this time is much smaller. India is only slightly ahead of America with 1.4 million active duty soldiers, while China takes the top spot with around 2 million. As far as reservists go, the US has around 800,000. That puts it in 10th place globally. Vietnam sits in the top spot with an astonishing 5 million reservists, while South Korea is in second with 3.1 million and Taiwan third with 2.3 million. Many of the countries taking the high spots in this list tend to have some sort of mandatory military service or have built their military strategies around having high numbers of reservists, rather than paying too many full-time salaries for active duty personnel. The US has always had a different strategy, focusing more on having highly trained, fully engaged soldiers ready to enter battle as and when required, rather than a huge reservist force. It's worth noting too, when it comes to manpower, that it's a question not only of quantity, but quality. A country could have 5 million soldiers but lack the infrastructure needed to properly train them for combat or equip them with the kinds of vehicles and weapons needed to outmatch their enemies. In contrast, the US has some of the strictest and most effective military training programs anywhere on Earth. This allows it to produce some of the most extraordinary military teams in history, from the Navy SEALs to the Green Berets. Even small amounts of America's most elite squads are much deadlier than huge battalions of soldiers from many other countries across the world. Now let's take a look at the various branches that make up the US military, namely the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps. There are also two more branches, the Space Force and the Coast Guard, but they're less prominent and not as relevant for the time being in terms of overall military might. When you look closely at different militaries around the world, many excel in one particular area but lag in others. Countries with long coastlines, for example, might invest heavily in strong naval forces to guard their waters, but might not have such strong ground or aerial forces. Other countries put a great deal of focus on aerial superiority, but wouldn't stand much chance in a naval battle. One of the ways in which the US has always stood out is the overall balance of its military. Whether fighting on the ground, in the air, or at sea, the US always remains one of the strongest and most formidable forces for any opponent to overcome. It's dominant in all domains, but there are still a few important differences between them. The US Army, for example, is the biggest of all the US military branches. It has over 450,000 active duty personnel, with more than 325,000 National Guard members and over 175,000 Army Reserve personnel, adding up to over 950,000 soldiers in total. The Air Force comes next, with around 495,000 members overall. That includes 322,000 active duty personnel, 105 members of the Air National Guard, and 68,000 reservists. Then there's the Navy. The branch has around 337,000 active duty members, with 58,000 in reserve for a total of approximately 438,000. The Marine Corps also reinforces the Navy with close to 170,000 fighters of its own and 33,000 more in reserve. These figures demonstrate the balance of America's military and how well prepared it is to fight on any and all fronts. And it's not just in manpower that these three branches excel, but also in terms of the weapons, vehicles, and equipment they're able to call on. The US Army, for example, has some of the most powerful tanks, vehicles, artillery systems, and rocket launchers by far. GFP's data gives the US 4,640 tanks in total. Of those, the M1 Abrams is the primary choice. This third-generation battle tank often tops experts' rankings of the world's toughest tanks. It's one of the heaviest in the world, tipping the scales at more than 73 tons, and has some of the strongest, most impenetrable armor around. A defensive powerhouse, it's also packed full of firepower with a 120mm smoothbore cannon, multiple mounted machine guns, and some models even come with smoke grenade launchers too. The M1 Abrams is a long-running member of the US military, having been used as far back as the 1980s. The Army has steadily improved it over the years, upgrading the older models with modern features and technologies. One of the most recent variants of the tank is the M1A2 Abrams SEP-V3, fitted with superior defense against explosions, next-gen armor, and an added auxiliary power unit. Some countries boast more tanks overall than the US. China has 6,800 at the latest count, while Russia has 5,750. However, once again, it's a question of quality over quantity. Many of Russia's tanks are the T-72 model, which lags far behind the M1 Abrams in terms of both offensive and defensive potential. Russia's more modern tank, the T-14 Armata, is a closer competitor to the Abrams, but there aren't too many of those in operation at the moment. For China, it's a similar story. The Chinese have two main tanks, the Type 96 and the Type 99. The Type 96 is no match for America's M1 Abrams. The Type 99, however, has several advantages over the Abrams, being both lighter at up to 58 tons and more mobile, reaching top speeds of up to 47 miles per hour, compared to the Abrams' 42 miles per hour. So as far as tanks go, America has a massive amount and the strongest units by most metrics. There are some other excellent tanks out there like the K2 Black Panther of South Korea, but the Abrams still reigns supreme, and the US is already working on its next improvement, the Abrams X, which is set to be lighter, faster, and more efficient than any M1 Abrams seen so far. In terms of armored vehicles, the US dominance is even clearer to see. GFP statistics show that the US has more than 390,000 armored vehicles in total. That's much, much higher than the country in second place, which is India, with just under 150,000. China takes third spot with a little over 144,000, and Russia has more than 131,000. In other words, even if you added all of Russia and China's vehicles, the US would still have more. But again, we have to talk about quality, not just quantity. Luckily for the US, the quality of its armored vehicles is second to none. It has an extensive and diverse fleet of vehicles, each one with its own assigned tasks and features. Some are good for transporting troops in large numbers across tricky terrain. Others are designed for support and evacuation. Others still are more offensively focused, boasting their own weapons and armaments. There are the Bradley Fighting Vehicles, or BFVs, for example. Several thousand of these vehicles are in action today, with many boasting 25mm chain guns and Tau missile launchers, which is enough firepower to take out enemy tanks at distances of up to 13,000 feet. Numerous other vehicles make up the US Army's expansive fleet, including Strykers, M88s, M113s, and MRAPs. They help with reconnaissance, transport, towing damaged vehicles to be repaired, and even helping units safely traverse areas with hidden mines and explosive devices. Moving on to artillery, this is one area in which the US is a little lacking. It boasts 671 self-propelled artillery systems, which pales in comparison to Russia's 5,000 and China's 3,500. With 1,212 towed artillery systems, America again falls behind multiple rivals, including Russia with 8,500 and South Korea with 4,400. For rocket projectors, the US sits 5th in the rankings with 641. China has 2,750 and Russia has more than 3,000. This then is an area in which the US could consider investing in or developing further if it wants to keep up with the competition. Now let's take off and explore America's extraordinary Air Force. As far as aerial combat goes, the US is unmatched. No other country even comes close, no matter which metric you look at. In terms of total aircraft, for example, the US has over 13,000. That's more than China and Russia put together, with 3,300 for China and 4,300 for Russia. The quality of America's aircraft is also undisputed, with some of the greatest, most expensive and most powerful bombers and jets the world has ever seen. Let's start with the bombers. The US is one of only a small number of countries to boast of its own bomber fleet, capable of dropping both conventional and nuclear bombs. The likes of B-2 Spirits and B-1B Lancers form that fleet. The Spirits cost over $1 billion each, but the US still has around 20 of them, which is easily enough to wipe out huge numbers of ground forces or even entire bases. The B-2s can even drop nuclear warheads if needed, as well as bunker-busting bombs that can penetrate hundreds of feet into the earth. Then there are the jets. Look at any list of the world's best jets, and you're sure to see US Air Force models claiming several of the top spots, like the F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning II. These jets are extraordinarily fast and capable of breaking the sound barrier without any trouble whatsoever. The F-22 can go twice as quick as sound, soaring to heights of 50,000 feet or more, and flying for more than 1,850 miles before it needs to refuel. The F-35 is another aerial titan with superior stealth qualities and ferocious firepower to outmatch almost any enemy jet it could encounter. The Air Force has hundreds of these jets, around 180 F-22s and more than 300 F-35s, backed up by hundreds of slightly less advanced but still powerful models, like the F-15s and F-16s. Other countries have some stellar jets of their own, like the Chinese Chengdu J-20 Mighty Dragon or the Russian Sukhoi Su-57, but the total strength of the US Air Force places it far ahead of either of its main rivals. And the impressive statistics don't stop there. The US Air Force also has around 600 tankers, which can refuel jets and bombers in the air, 920 transport aircraft, multiple reconnaissance planes, and thousands upon thousands of helicopters. In fact, GFP stats show a total of over 5,800 helicopters for America, with more than 1,000 attack helicopters. Other countries cannot compete with that. Russia is the nearest rival, but only has a fraction of the American tally, with 1,651 helicopters and 557 attack units. Finally, let's look at the US Navy and assess how well prepared America is for combat at sea. Yet again, the US dominates many statistics in this category, though not quite as many as it does on land or in the air. As far as overall Navy sizes go, for example, China takes the crown. It's invested massively in its naval force over recent years and can now call on over 750 vessels, including warships, submarines, and more. America's Navy is the second largest, with a total of 440 vessels. Of those vessels, 11 are carrier ships, which are some of the most important elements in any great navy. The carriers allow the US to transport jets, attack helicopters, and other aircraft huge distances across the globe for military operations far from home. China can't compete with that, as it has only 3 carriers for now. Russia, meanwhile, has just 1. As far as helicopter carriers go, the US again leads the way with 9. China has 4, along with Japan, and Russia has none. Again, this gives the US a huge edge in terms of planning and implementing long-running, long-range military operations anywhere it wants. The US also has the most destroyers, with 81 in total, that live up to their name, wreaking destructive havoc wherever they go, targeting enemy vessels, aircraft, and even ground-based vehicles and structures too. China comes second with 50 destroyers, while Russia, which lags in many naval statistics, has only 10. Not all naval forces float on the water's surface. Some lurk down in the depths, hidden from view, waiting to strike. Submarines make up another large part of the US Navy fleet, with 70 in total. Russia sits in second with 63, while China has 61. So by almost all of these major metrics, the US Navy is ahead of its competition. It has a mighty naval force with some of the finest subs, destroyers, and colossal carriers to conduct all manner of military operations at sea. There are still a few areas of improvement. The US has 0 frigates, for instance, while many countries have at least a dozen, and China has close to 50. America has no patrol vessels either, while China boasts 150. The number of corvettes is also quite low, with only 26, far below China's 72 and Russia's 83. And it has just 8 mine and countermine warships, while Russia and China again claim the top spots with 47 and 36, respectively. It's worth noting, however, that the US already has plans underway to construct more frigates and corvettes to keep pace with growing naval forces in the East. Add to that the fact that the US is working on next-generation jets, tanks, vehicles, and surveillance systems, and boasts the world's greatest military intelligence capabilities. And it's clear to see that no other country comes close to America when it comes to defense. And it's likely to remain that way for many more years to come, with the US committed to keeping defense spending high and maintaining its position as the world's undisputed #1 military power. Can you see any other country coming close to the US military in years to come, or even overtaking the US someday? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and thank you as always for watching.